Welcome to Rise and Thrive Women, journeying from surviving to thriving after abuse. We're your hosts, Susie and Heather, and we're so honored to have you here. If you've experienced the heartache of toxic relationships, you know the feeling of being lost, broken, and unsure of where to turn next. And this show is for you.
We're here to inspire, educate, empower, and empower women like you, no matter where you are on your healing journey. Together, we will challenge misconceptions surrounding domestic abuse, explore practical solutions, and listen to incredible survivor stories that remind us all that there is a brighter, better future waiting for you. It's time to rise, thrive, and choose yourself. Let's begin this healing journey together. Today, we are joined with Stacey Uhrig. She is certified. She's a certified trauma care practitioner and rapid transformational therapy practitioner. It's a mouthful. So Stacey also hosts a podcast called Flip Your Mindset and blends modalities like polyvagal theory and parts work to help individuals heal unresolved emotional wounds, rebuild confidence, reconnect with their true selves, and develop lasting resilience.
Yay, we're so glad you're here, Stacey. We've gotten to have you now twice.
Yes.
And we have a third show planned, I think, next month. So Thank you for joining us again. But before we jump in, Heather and I just wanted to quickly share something really special. We've talked about it a little bit on our platforms already. The new membership program that we've recently launched, which is also called Rise and Thrive Women. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a private off social media community for women that are healing from narcissistic abuse and or toxic relationships. If you don't identify with the word narcissistic abuse, toxicity is absolutely running rampant and women getting out of these relationships. So whether you're still in this relationship, figuring out how to leave, or building your life after, we have a space for you there.
Yeah, and when you join, you'll have access to all of the past workshops as well as future workshops that Heather and I plan on doing. We have bi-monthly live coaching calls and just a really supportive private forum, as well as a bunch of training videos and resources. So Heather and I have done the math, and it's over a $3,000 value with everything that we have inside of there. And right now we offer a free 7-day trial so people can get in there and check it out and see if it's a right fit for them. And then it's only $19 a month after that. And that's a price we plan on only keeping at $19 for a short period of time before it goes up. And there's an even deeper discount if you purchase an annual membership. So we feel like it's a great deal.
Yeah, and we're only building to, it's not complete, which is why we're offering it so discounted right now. So it's only going to get better, and we're only going to offer more. So the link to join is in the show notes. If you're watching on Susie's YouTube, if you're catching me on Instagram, the link is in my link tree that's in my bio. So if you're interested in checking it out more, if not, no pressure. We're here to talk about Stacey today. So
yay. Thanks for sitting through our spiel, Stacey.
Listen, we're all building something. So I think it's great.
Yeah, we're excited about it. Our goal or dream is always been to provide something affordable to people so that they can get the resources they need. And we really feel like this accomplishes that. So anyways, but we're here today to talk about a really important topic, and a topic that maybe a lot of people haven't heard about. I think it's thrown out there, but I know when I first heard about inner child healing, I was like, what the heck is that even? So we're going to be talking about that today because you have some experience in working with clients on healing their inner child. So we thought we would just kind of start with the basics to help people understand what is the inner child. So I'm going to turn that question to you, Stacey. How would you describe the inner child, and why is she such an important part of the healing process for trauma survivors?
So, it does bring me to parts work, what we were talking about before, Heather. The way I see inner children, if you will, is we're all walking with a catalog of lived experiences. Right? Every single person in the world is walking with a catalog of lived experiences. And those lived experiences influence how we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. When we have experiences during our developmental years, which are the years that we're kind of forming our core beliefs, which is that lens through which we see ourselves, some of the experiences we have become these core memories, and they kind of get stuck in that space. And so when it comes to the idea of inner child work, I can't really, from my practice, do it separately from parts work, because I see it as when we have experiences growing up where a part of us has to engage, it kind of engages at the age of the need in that moment, but it doesn't age with you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
for example, if you had a moment or a series of moments growing up where you felt unsafe and you learned that people pleasing was going to really help you in that moment or in those series of moments, you kind of harness this part of yourself, which is the people pleasing part, as a coping strategy and as a mechanism for, survival. And it doesn't age with you. So if you end up becoming 50 years old and you engage that part of you when you were 8, that's the inner child work, in the sense of we get to go back, and I use hypnosis a lot of times to do this with my clients. We go back to revisit moments. They're known as scenes in rapid transformational therapy, but you can think of them as milestone moments where you had an experience and you brilliantly harnessed this part of yourself, or this part of yourself came forward in survival and protection of you in that moment. It worked, but now this is the lens through which you're living life, and it is no longer a helper, it is a hinder. And so going back and revisiting that part of you at that age and giving it the opportunity to unburden itself from that responsibility and to heal it's almost like closing a loop. It's like sometimes we find ourselves, say, we'll just use 8 years old as an example, having a situation at 8 years old that we never got a chance to complete, meaning we had something really scary happen, and then we didn't have the appropriate support in order to process what happened. So we're kind of stunted, where we had to stop ourselves from processing. So when I go in and I do that hypnosis, not only are we trying to get a better understanding and relationship with the part, but we're also able to help that part complete the cycle. So they're no longer living in this like limbo purgatory space.
Right.
And they can then, the way I do it, I have a unique way of doing it. Then I have it kind of integrate and come into where you are now. That's my explanation. I mean, everyone's going to explain it differently, but just from the work that I do, that's my best way of explaining it.
It makes total sense.
I think that is the best description of inner child work I've ever heard.
So good. Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like Will Ferrell in Old School right now, because when he stands like in the thing during the debate and he regurgitates a whole bunch of stuff, and then he's like, I don't even know what I said. That was me right now. Like, I don't really know what I said, but I'll take it if it makes sense.
It was
I
very.
think it's really important that people understand what the one thing that you said that I've never heard anybody. Well, there was a few things, but the first thing that you said that registered with me was that part doesn't age.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Age.
And I mean, when we hear inner child, that should you should understand that that's what it means. But when you say that part doesn't age, and when it's activated, it comes out no matter how old you are and where you are in life. So
and we share it like when, like, let's just say you have a part that's like an anger part. Okay. And something happens and you lose your cool. And then you say to someone like, I don't even recognize who that was. Like, I felt like I was 5 years old. Like, or that person's acting like they're 10 years old. Like, what is going on? And I always, like, my ears perk up when I hear people say that, because we do say those things, right? Like, you're acting like such a child. But the reality is that part probably is kind of the part that's driving the bus, or, leading the pack in that moment. And it probably is a young part. And I think, what's not lost on me is when I do rapid transformational therapy with my clients, and I use it specifically to help them heal developmental trauma, right? Or complex PTSD. And I do parts work under hypnosis, which is very cool. At some point, I will ask the part directly, how old were you when you came into Susie's system? And honestly, 3, 5, 8, like they're not like, well, what do you mean? Like they know it. They say it. Like it's intuitive.
Wow.
And then I say, well, what was going on in Susie's life when you decided to come in and help her? And they'll explain it. Like the person's saying it under hypnosis, but it's like I'm accessing the part directly. And then this is the kicker. Do you know how old Susie is now? And then there's confusion usually. And then I'll say, Susie, can you just speak out loud how old you are? And we'll hear like 50, 55, 60, 49, 48.
Wow.
And then I ask, I'm just curious how does that part feel about that knowledge that you're 50, let's just say. And so many people say the same thing, which is shocked, confused, relieved. They all say the same thing. It's fascinating for me as the practitioner to watch because I know what they're going to say because it's the natural course to say. And when I say, tell me about the relief, there's usually a lot of tears and it's like, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Like, and the part is saying this, like, I'm tired. And so, there's a sense of relief of like, whoa, you're 50. Like maybe I don't need to be so burdened with this responsibility anymore. And this is where building the relationship between you as yourself, being led by your self energy, which is the language we use in internal family systems, parts work, versus the part. And now we can say, hey, can we build a different relationship here? Like you don't need to be burdened with the responsibility of keeping me safe or keeping me seen anymore. Like I'm older now. I've got many more resources. And so this is part of the reframing that happens under hypnosis where we can gain a much deeper clarity of the reality of the situation and then give out new roles and responsibilities to all the different parts of us. So we're not feeling all this inner turmoil all the time.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting.
For those of you watching, sorry, I just wanted to say, Stacey, this is the second time we've had Stacey, and she mentioned hypnotherapy. I think our next live is going to be in July, and we're going to dive more into hypnotherapy. Is that right? We didn't cover hypnotherapy. No, we did polyvagal theory. Now we're doing inner child. And our next episode will be hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
So just for those watching, if you want to tune in.
Yeah. And Stacey, I don't think we had this in our questions, but as you were talking, I'm just curious, does something traumatic have to happen for this inner child to be created, I guess?
Well, it's really interesting. And I'm only just going to give you my personal point of view, right? Because as we get trained in all these different modalities, like we understand it and we kind of take it into our own philosophy or in our own point of view. I know that we've all been trained in trauma here, right? So one of the big conversations that happens behind the scenes among trauma practitioners is, do we really use the word trauma? Because it disengages people. Like people don't want to hear the word trauma, or they disqualify themselves because maybe they didn't have abuse or violence or, something
things happening, right?
Yeah, they don't think that there was any trauma. So let's reword it a little bit, right? Because people get confused. They don't really understand what trauma is. The Greek word for trauma, like the root of the word for trauma from back in the day, is wound. So you can have a psychological trauma, you can have an emotional trauma, you can have physical traumas. And, what we'll hear very often from people is trauma is not just what happened, right? So an event can be traumatic in the moment. It can be really scary, really big, all the twos, like too much, too big, too too often, whatever. However, once that moment is over, that series of moments is gone and in the rearview mirror, the trauma that lingers is not what happened, but what's continuing to happen. It's the lens through which you're continuing to see your life. So I think everybody has had adversity that's probably left some sort of wound. The wound can be a freaking paper cut.
Mm-hmm.
But if a paper cut doesn't heal and you get acid or salt in it, it hurts. Sometimes you don't even know you have the paper cut till you're cutting a lemon,
Mm-hmm.
right? So to me, the paper cut, or the 1,000 lacerations, as I like to call it, in your nervous system, when they're not appropriately processed and healed when they're happening, they don't properly heal over time. And so when we hear the word trigger, the way I visualize it is someone's just taking their finger and digging it into the wound and turning it.
Yeah.
Or they're dumping salt into it.
Mm-hmm.
So does everybody have to have a trauma to have an inner child? Everybody has adversity in their life. Nobody doesn't have adversity in their life. Life is a series of adverse experiences that are divinely designed for us. And they're meant for us to gain a lot of insight into ourselves. So I think all of us do develop parts. And I think all these parts are kind of inherent to begin with, and they get activated. And some just have more activated parts than others. But everyone uses this language. There's a part of me that wants to do X, and there's a part of me that wants to do Y. There's a part of me that sees it this way, but there's a part of me that really wants to see it the other way.
Yeah.
So no matter what our lived experiences were growing up, we all have parts developed. It's just that not all of our parts are hindering us.
Mm-hmm. So insightful. I know. So good.
I love that you say that. I know that I still have to dive into the second question, Stacey, but Susie and I were just talking about that. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it, Susie? When I said I've recently joined the local chamber here, and I was sharing with Susie, whenever I say trauma recovery coach, everyone wants me to, link up with the substance abuse centers and the domestic violence shelters. And don't get me wrong, I love that work. It is very much my passion, and I will do that work for as long as it needs to be done and as long as I have the energy to do it. But the thing that I was sharing with Susie was they hear trauma and they think of worst case scenario of what trauma can lead to. And they don't realize that everyone is walking around with trauma. So I've had to redesign my message and use new words that other people will identify with, because the minute they hear trauma, they completely disconnect from it. Yeah. So, sorry. Next question.
No, don't be sorry. Yeah.
I'm trying to stick to it, but I love this conversation.
Yeah.
I love where it takes us. So, in your experience, women who have experienced narcissistic abuse that struggle with self-worth and people pleasing, or emotional dysregulation, how do those patterns connect to their inner child wounds?
Well, listen, these were parts of us that were probably developed well before we ever met the person that we were in this coercive control with, right? But I think what happens is when we have these parts, like you guys tell me, what I see a lot, we know on the spectrum of these types of relationships that there tends to be an attraction between somebody that's narcissistic in nature and somebody who's, say, very empathic on the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yes.
And the person that's empathic on the other end of the spectrum has gotten very, very keen and very, very good at being the savior and the fixer and the people pleaser and the problem solver. So they had that well before they got into this relationship. Those were well-developed parts of themselves. What happens is then when you're in this, because we don't know what we're in, and we know there's something funky about it, and we know it's not clicking, we then harness these parts even further to try to fix a problem that we're actually is not fixable from our end.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend it could be weeks, months, days, it could be decades trying to make this better until you have this realization of, oh my God, this actually has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
But in the process, I have lost myself because I've spent so much time ignoring my own needs and deprioritizing my nervous system and just trying to create some sort of landscape or some sort of environment that will not cause the eruptions or not cause the backhanded comments or not cause the control and the manipulation and all these things, that the parts just get bigger and bolder. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when I'm doing work with my clients that are coming, they're either, I have the gamut. Like, I can be working with a client that's coming to me because they know they're in a relationship that they don't want to be in anymore, but yet they are really having a hard time going no contact. Say there's no children involved, say they're just dating and they go no contact, then they go back and they go no contact and they go back and they just don't stick with it and they're frustrated with themselves. And then after a handful of sessions, I'm able to start to get a very strong instinct that this is not, I'm going to call a normal relationship. And that there is coercive control happening. And I'll pull up that DV cycle and that image, and I'll pull up that control and power image. And, they see 9 or 8 of the 10 pieces of this cycle present in their relationship. Right. So I've got that where they're actually starting to recognize it while we're working together. And it was not in their purview before. Or they're coming to me because they know they're in it and they don't know how to get out of it, or they're in a divorce and mediation situation, or they're on the other side and they're still being abused. Right? So we're in the whole cycle. People come to me at different parts inside that cycle. And it's depending on where they come in, depends on the level of support that they need and how much I'm going to introduce parts to begin with anyway, because there's a grief, there's a shock, there's an awe. We're just holding space for what's going on presently. And we may or may not be dealing with parts at the very beginning because there is real grief and there is real shock and there is real awe and disappointment and sadness and anger. And these are all really normal responses to an incredibly abnormal circumstance.
Absolutely.
So I don't necessarily run into parts work right away. It really just depends on where we're at in that particular space because it's such a nuanced space.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that, given, what the work that you guys do?
You go first.
You want to go first? No, I mean, I think you explained it really well. I think what I took away from that is it sounds like when you're in this unhealthy relationship dynamic, that inner child almost becomes more activated, trying to solve this problem that's unsolvable in most cases. It's like it becomes hyper vigilant. And that it makes total sense. Like you said, it's typically a protector part. So trying to protect you from, whatever outcome you fear the most. So it makes complete sense how that's all intertwined. So.
Yeah, I will say most of the people that I've talked to are women who've gone through this, and the patterns that they have are, they don't necessarily, not every single one of them have gone through childhood abuse and have, wounds that they wear on their sleeves, but it's absolutely clear that somewhere along the way, they learned to take responsibility for their environment, handling everything in their environment around them. They have taken responsibility for solving their own issues, not feeling supported by a caregiver. I'll say that. And when they're in narcissistic abuse, to your point earlier, it's almost like because they're so used to having to solve those problems, they engulf themselves into the narcissist and completely lose sight of who they are by constantly trying to regulate their partner's emotions.
That's right.
And the few men that I've talked to, I will say they're more, I don't know, they're more prone to constantly soothe their partner. That is, their verbiage is typically like, she's always escalated, and they're constantly chasing after her and trying to settle her mood so that she's in a more calm state. I'm kind of stuttering through that a little bit, but that's been my experience in general, where men play a role of constantly feeling responsible for soothing, whereas women are constantly walking on eggshells and feel responsible for avoiding any sort of conflict.
100%. Yep. I see that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So good. Well, I think maybe we've covered this next question. Do you agree, Heather, that we had planned the parts work? Maybe we jump to the next one.
Oh, sure.
Talk about nervous
You can take
system. So we talked a lot the last time we had you on, Stacey, about nervous system regulation. So we're curious, what role does the nervous system play in this type of work, and why is it important to create internal safety before diving into this really deep type of emotional healing?
Well, look, I love this concept. That's you guys can put this into the show notes if you want. The name of the person that developed this concept is Ruth Culver, Culver, and she created something known as the Survive Thrive Spiral. And what I love about it is it mixes this idea of parts work, which I think is just really hard to separate from inner child work at all. Like, I just see them as being very similar. And the polyvagal theory. And the polyvagal theory is the nervous system piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of shows what it means to have an optimal window of coping. And being grounded in your self energy is the language we would use in internal family systems. And being in a position where all things are capable and all things are doable. And there's this strong sense of anything's achievable. Like, it's this I can place. And if you're looking at something like the window of tolerance, it would be that, very wide window of what they call the window of tolerance, the window of capacity. It's this optimal window for coping with life's traditional stressors. Mm-hmm. But when our parts are engaged and our parts are leading, so we're no longer self-led, we're parts-led, we move into this activated state of I must, and I need to take action, and I need to control an outcome, and I need to do something in order, like you were saying before, Heather, to prevent, right? Or in a guy's situation, like you were describing, in order to soothe, basically, like to take care of and to try to peacekeep. Both are really trying to peacekeep. It's just one's reactive and one's kind of proactive. But we're in this I need to take action. We might hear that as sympathetic. We might hear that as a fight or flight response. We might hear that as hyperarousal, depending on what graphic you're looking at. But it's this I take action part. And then within the nervous system, when we have the sense that taking action just no longer is the feasible thing, it's not going to work, then we kind of go into this other zone. So we've gone from I can and I must to I can't. And I can't is that hypoarousal, right? Or in polyvagal theory, it's that dorsal vagal shutdown, right? She calls it, Ruth calls it drop and flop, which is how I see it. And that's what we do. And so having an optimal window, like, people don't understand what a window of tolerance is. And to me, it's one of the most fundamental things to have to explain to my clients. because they realize their window's very narrow, or they're very, very rarely rooted in that self energy. They're very rarely in a position where they have a wide tolerance for life, or a wide tolerance, a capacity for life's stressors. So a lot of times we're trying to figure out what's causing that window to be so narrow, where you're always in this I have to and I must zone. And what are the things that can widen your window, and what are the things that are closing your window? So I don't see those as separate. I see, and that's why I love the Survive, Thrive spiral that she developed, because they're all a part of the same thing. That, you know, she shows it as, here where your parts are activated, here's where your nervous system is, here's where you are in that window of tolerance. And it's this beautiful illustration. And my clients can easily self-identify when I print that paper up for them, that picture of exactly where they are all the time. And how do I get back down to that I can connection with myself?
Yeah. Wow. So that all makes sense. And kind of circling back to what you said earlier, that if you have a client in front of you who is really in the thick of things, within a toxic relationship, you may not engage with that inner child yet at that point. You may not engage with those parts, because it's kind of survival mode at that point. So to me, it seems like this is, I like to kind of explain this to our viewers, because a lot of people are on their healing journey, or maybe they are still in the thick of this relationship. And where would this be appropriate along that journey of healing? And it seems like it's, getting a little bit further down the path and out of that chaos.
Well,
When you can
it's
really
interesting too. It's like, if my client is coming in unsettled, right? So they're agitated. Obviously, their nervous system is being hijacked in that moment. The first thing we need to be able to do in order to do any work is to get them to feel safe. When they're feeling safe, their nervous system's not going to be hijacked. The hijacked nervous system, the anxiety, the panic, the dysregulation, it's all a message and an alert of, I'm not in a zone of safety. So sometimes we're just getting them back into that zone of safety. Healing cannot occur when we're not in a safety zone, right? When we can get into that zone of safety and the parts are settled down and we don't have the inmates running the asylum, because that's what it kind of feels like, right? Then we can start to talk about what was happening inside your nervous system. And that's when I might ask, even outside of hypnosis, tell me about a time as far back as you can go where you remember having a reaction like that in your nervous system. And they can do it. They know, oh, I was 9 years old the first time I felt that, or I was 12. And we talk about, well, what was going on then? And how is that similar to now? And it's really just getting them to start to understand there's this through line of, wow, this part's been present for me and activated for me for a very large part of my life. And we just need to start to even become aware of that in order to build a relationship with it. It takes time.
Right, for sure. I had a comment come through as we were chatting from Global, that competition and isolation in youth supports fake people, lying, cheating, and stealing. If it works, it becomes a habit. So I think what they're saying here is, if, as a child, you were in a situation, where you were made to compete against maybe a sibling, or there was this very strong air of competition within the family, or if isolation happens, children will develop these mechanisms. It may not be a coping mechanism. It may be lying to get themselves in a better position within the family.
That's right.
And, that then translates years down the road into a regular behavior of, that response to keep you safe. So
listen, I love the work of Janina Fisher, and I'm in her complex PTSD course right now. And why I chose to take that course is because the way she describes healing for trauma survivors is the way I see it, which I was like, I just need to hear the way she talks about it, which is everything is an adaptation and survival. in its
Mhm.
most simple forms. Everything is an adaptation to survival. And so the three words I've learned to be the most useful for myself, for my clients is this. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that that's how that person deals with stress or feels threatened or doesn't feel safe? Isn't that interesting that that's the way that I'm still adapting? Isn't that interesting that this is the way that I'm still reacting? And instead
Yeah.
of judging ourselves and being angry with ourselves and judging other people, it all comes from a place of curiosity. And
Mhm.
so even just getting my clients to even harness the idea of curiosity, not just in relationships with other people, but in relationship with themselves and themselves, right? Like all the parts, all the self parts, it changes everything when you start to
Mhm.
get curious. Isn't that interesting? That
Yeah.
this is the reason why you're here and showing up for me right now in my nervous system.
Mhm. That's a great way of looking at it that I think a lot of people need to hear for sure. So, yeah, thank you, Global, if you're still listening for your comments because it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You make sense. So, all right.
So I honestly, I will go ahead and ask this last question. I feel like we touched on it a little bit, but I think asking it directly may help a little bit. So, if someone feels totally disconnected from their inner child or scared to even begin, what's a gentle first step or tool that you recommend?
Okay. So that makes me think of a client that I've worked with now for maybe close to a year. And she had a really incredibly traumatic childhood. All the different kinds of traumas you can possibly imagine. And um it has impacted her into adulthood, right? It's impacted her in her relationships, it's impacted her in her parenting and in all aspects of her life, in her business, the way that she interprets things that are said or done. And she really is diving deep into the work. When we talk about the parts work and I talk about there being a sense of safety, sometimes it takes a long time just for the person to feel safe enough to start to open up and be even more honest, right? I mean, we could take 8 sessions just to get
Mhm.
to that point. So there was a moment in a session, I don't know how long we had been working together, it could have been 3 or 4 months, where I just felt intuitively, and I think it's important that we use our intuition as practitioners, that there was a part that was present that I
Mhm.
could maybe address. So I asked
Mhm.
her to close her eyes and I asked her to start kind of going down this visualization and this journey that I felt strongly that she needed in that moment. And very easily, because I think we had this attunement and we had this connection, very easily, this part was present. It was a very young part, maybe adolescent, 10, 9, 10, 11, something like that. She could clearly describe her. And this part showed up in this vision that I created for her behind a glass wall. And she was kind of hiding in a corner. She didn't like to be seen, but she wanted to be seen. She wanted to be connected with, but she was terrified to be connected with. And I just follow what, any practitioner knows this is client led. This is not our agenda. It is their agenda. We just use our intuition and our tools and our guidance to help them get to where they want to be. And so we made a connection with that part, but we didn't go very far with that part. We just
Mhm.
allowed that part to feel okay with being seen.
Mhm.
And at one point, my client said she's done. And I was like, okay, cool. And maybe it lasted 10 minutes. But now that part likes to come back into the mix, and she'll say to me, oh, I feel like my part's present right now. Like that younger part, like she has so many, we all have so many parts, but she knows that part in particular. We've learned how to discern when it's in her system. We've learned how to discern when it's active. It has a very specific feeling to it. I call it a nuanced ringtone. And so now it'll pop in, and it's starting to get more comfortable. And so, you know, the parts will connect when the part feels safe. This is why safety is so important. And again, remember, the part's young. It doesn't realize that my client is decades older than when this part came into her system. So she doesn't know that my client's more resourced and not reliant on her parents to meet her needs, and that she is safe to be able to say whatever it is that she wants to express to close that loop that we talked about before, and actually receive the support she needed that she didn't get.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I just think, you know, read me the question again. Tell me exactly what you said.
Yeah. So someone feels, if someone feels totally disconnected from their inner child or scared,
Yeah.
what's a gentle first step or tool?
So that is like it, because it's not that the person's disconnected, the part is disconnected. Because we're all, when we're led with our self energy and we're rooted in ourself, we're hardwired for connection, right? So we have very clear qualities of when we are self-engaged, or when we're rooted in ourself, or when we're in alignment, and connection is one of them. And so when we're disconnected, it's a really good indicator that we're not being self-led. And so it just goes back to that example that I gave, which is that part. I knew the part was there. We tried to talk to her a little bit. She allowed herself to be seen, but it really ended pretty quickly because she didn't feel fully safe. And so you just have to kind of lead with whatever's present, not force anything, and see everything as a good enough and great. And it's just one more step towards. And now this client knows what to do, and she'll tell me, oh, I had a whole conversation with that part of me today in the car. I had this hour-long drive and I felt her come up, and I gave her a framework to use to try to connect with it. And she's like, here's what she had to say. And it was so fascinating. But it's taken a year for this part to actually want to come up and have these conversations.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's super interesting. I think this information today has been so great for anybody who's kind of interested in doing this work. Is there anything that we didn't talk about when it comes to inner child healing, Stacey, that you want to mention before we kind of wrap things up? And
I mean, listen, I think it's just really important, because I know a lot of the language we're using may not be familiar to people. But I think the simplest way for people to understand is that we all are made of multiple parts, including ourselves, right? And when we're rooted in ourselves, we know it because we say it. Oh my God, I felt so great today. I just felt like me. I felt so aligned. I felt like I was in flow. I felt so connected to myself. Like, you know it. You're on fire, right? When you're connected to yourself. And we're just not really taught that when you're not feeling that way, it's not that there's something broken or wrong, or that you're diseased or disordered. It's just that if you really do understand this parts concept, it's a good indicator that your parts are more at play. And it doesn't mean that you're messed up. It just means that that part thinks it needs to be running the show. And building that connection to get that part to understand it actually doesn't need to be running the show is the work. And a great example, like the best illustration of this work for anybody that's curious and familiar, is Inside Out 2, hands down.
When you said core memory earlier, Stacey, you said core memory, and I was just like, oh, I love Inside Out 1 and 2. I love both of them.
Inside Out 2 specifically, I don't know who they hired as their like advisors and their consultants when developing the film, but clearly they hired people who know parts work, because anybody that's a
Mhm.
parts work practitioner that watches that film knows we're not talking about emotions, we're talking about parts. And the way that they
Yeah.
so brilliantly took it from beginning to end, meaning they showed that you have a whole bunch of memories and experiences, and then a subset of those become core memories, and then a subset of those become your core beliefs, and you live your life through that series of beliefs of how you see
Mhm.
yourself and how you see the world and other people. And then in the movie, they literally show self get kicked all the way back to this no man's land, and all these parts are on a journey back to self. All the
Mhm.
while, anxiety has taken over and is leading everything, and everything's being controlled through the seat of anxiety and not self. And when they bring that
Mhm.
self energy back, now there's kind of this internal turmoil between joy and the anxiety, because they both think they know what's best for this child. It's a child in the movie, and they have to learn how to actually harmonize and have a healthy relationship. That's the work of parts work. It's how do we have balance? We're not looking to get rid of a part ever. Every part is valued and important
Mhm.
and good and benevolent, even if it shows up in a way that's destroying your life. It thinks it's helping you. How do we get
Mhm.
curious about it? How do we form a relationship with it so there's harmony in the system, not discord? So if
Mhm.
anybody's curious about any of this work, Inside Out 2 is a
Mhm.
fantastic illustration of all of this. Like, it's the best illustration I've ever seen.
Awesome. And a fun way to learn about it. I actually haven't seen the second one. I need to watch that now after
Oh
hearing
my
you
God.
talk
So
about it.
now you're going to go watch it and you're
It's gonna be on my
dying.
list.
I
Yeah.
went and saw it in the theater with my husband. I said, "Oh, this is a field trip for work, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
actually like pay for it through the business." And we went,
Yeah.
and every 5 minutes, I'm like pinching him. I'm like, "Oh my God, did you see that core memory? Do you understand what they're doing?" Like, I was geeking out so bad because it was the
Oh.
first time I was seeing it. I was just shocked at
I
how
love
well
that.
they actually illustrated what happens inside all of us. Every single
Mhm.
person has that journey all
That's
day,
awesome.
every day.
Yeah, definitely putting that on the list to
Yeah,
watch. So
it's the best.
great. Yes. Did anyone ask any questions on any of your side of things, guys? Did you see anything
I
come
don't
through?
see anything coming up on my side.
Okay.
I
I didn't
I
want.
don't see anything on my side either, but something's
Okay.
been going on with my Instagram. I think my YouTube channel would have come through on the back end here, right? I assume so.
Yeah, I think it would have.
Um,
Yeah.
but Instagram has been frozen since about like, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes in. There have been
Okay.
people coming in and out, but no questions.
Okay. Well, if anyone has questions after watching this, or if you catch this recording later, feel free to drop your questions in any of our channels where you're watching this. We'd love to circle back and we can pass those along to Stacey too if we see them. So before we wrap up though, can you just tell us a little bit more about where to find you, Stacey, if somebody is interested in doing this work with you?
Absolutely. So, a great place if a person is a scroller and a troller is Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just my name, Stacey Uhrig, Uhrig. And I really use that platform solely for psychoeducation. So everything we're talking about here and more can be found on Instagram. And my website is flipyourmindset.com. And that's where you can kind of learn more about my one-to-one services and sign up for a consult and all that good stuff. And then, of course, I have the podcast, which you can find on any platform, which is Flip Your Mindset.
Awesome. And we'll have you back again next month.
I would
So
love
people
it.
don't have to wait too long to see you again. So,
Yeah.
all
Yeah, so if
right.
you're catching the replay, please be sure to subscribe so that you can catch Stacey here next month where we're talking about hypnotherapy.
Yeah. I can't
Yes. All right. Well, should we close it out, ladies?
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. So thank
All
you
right.
all for joining us on this episode of Rise and Thrive Women. We hope today's conversation has inspired you to take charge of your healing journey. Whether it's a new perspective, renewed hope, or the courage to move forward, it is something worth celebrating.
And remember, your story is still unfolding and your past does not define you. Within you lies strength, power, and limitless potential. Embrace it. Trust and follow your intuition with courage. Be bold, be brave, and always trust yourself. Until we meet again, take care, rise above, and thrive. You've got this.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again, Stacey.
You're so welcome.